Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be back here in New South Wales to see all the familiar faces that we haven't seen for only 6 months. It wasn't that long ago. But today I would like to share with you a part from a series that we've been presenting over in WA, Searching for Love. And this series looks at, in many ways, many different attributes of self, the origin of love, where it comes from, how is it played out in our lives, how do we experience love between people in social relationships, between us and God. Today I want to share with you part 8, which is entitled, Love Your Enemies. And I want to ask a question as I the series, and this question deals with something that takes place usually within church relationships and family relationships. Something that I'm sure if I asked you, you would all be very well familiar with. And that is hurt. Where does hurt come from? And why are we hurt when other people do us wrong? And I want to have a look at that in relation to the love that we read in 1 John that is akin to God, where the Bible tells us that God is love. How does hurt and love go together? Can they go together? But the question I want to bring to you, which we'll be looking at as we go through our presentation this morning, is the question of, is it possible to love people that hurt us? Now, this is a question we're going to be coming back to right at the end. And as we go through, I want to be able to break down this question and hopefully, from the Word of God, answer. Is it possible for us here, I'm not talking about anyone else, but us here in this room today, is it possible for you to love those that have hurt you in some way? Now, to begin with, I want to clarify the word hurt here. Because hurt can mean many things. Hurt can be when someone punches you and you feel physical pain. But that's not the hurt I want to talk about. The hurt that in this question I'm referring to is when somebody wrongs you. Somebody says something negative against you. Somebody backbites you. Somebody starts a rumor about you which is not true. And it hurts you in your heart. This is the hurt that I want to refer to. So as we go through, you need to keep that in mind, because if we diverge from that and think it's physical hurt or it's hurts when a parent raises their children to love God, teaches them moral principles, and that child goes out and goes into the world and leaves, that hurt is not what we're talking about, that the parent experiences. That aching for their child, that has been taught the right, that knows the right, but has wasted it. That is not the hurt we're referring to. The hurt I want to look at today is the hurt that comes when somebody in the church may have wronged you. Or the hurt that you feel from your spouse when they say something that's negative. That's the hurt we're looking at. So this is the hurt in the question. Is it possible to love people that hurt us? Now, I'm sure that all of us have experienced some point in our life the hurt that I'm referring to here. Somebody said something. Somebody might have spoken behind your back. A look, a word, a suggestion, an action that might have brought pain to your heart, that might be hurting you. Maybe to the extent that you've built up walls between you and the person that has hurt you, and you just can't get past that. It's like a big barrier, and you can't even stand in the same room with that person because the hurt is so strong that you can't deal with it. So to be able to survive, you must separate yourself from the person that has brought about the hurt. Our key text we read in Matthew chapter 5 verse 44. Jesus says, "But I say unto you, love your enemies." Now Jesus is referring to not human love here. He's referring to that love that comes from God. Who can love their enemy? Have you ever tried loving your enemy? Now notice here, he defines the enemy. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Now I want to look at this verse for a moment and break it down. It begins by saying love your enemies, and then it goes and gives a description of how to understand what is an enemy. What is a person that is called your enemy? He says bless them. Now he puts it in this way. This is what you're to do in spite of what they are doing. He says you are to bless those that do what? Curse you. Hold in front of somebody, and under their imagination, and you see, as you look in the revision mirror, you see a few words being spoken. Maybe a finger. Or the window comes down, the fist comes out. Cursing. It says, bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. Now, we all know what hate is, yeah? We understand the term of what hate is. When somebody hates you, they don't like you, yeah? It's the opposite to liking or to loving. It says that we're to do good to them that hate you and pray for them which despitefully use you. Now, when Jesus was saying these words, I don't believe that he was saying pray, this sort of prayer. Father, please convert their heart so they won't hurt me anymore. Father, just change their life so they no longer will say those bad things to me. So I'll feel better. I think in this verse here, Jesus is talking about a different type of prayer. Now, that word despitefully use you, despitefully there, if you look it up in the Greek, it means slander, speaking against. Those that talk against you about your character, about who you are, put you down so they might be lifted up. It says those we are to pray for, those that speak against us. And then finally it says also that we are to pray for those that persecute us. Now, if we look into that word persecute, it simply means to pursue for evil intention. So those people that are out to get you for an evil purpose, persecute you. We are commanded to pray. So here we find a definition of what an enemy is. Somebody that will curse you, somebody that hates you, somebody that will backbite, slander, speak against you, put down who you are, diminish you, and those that go out of their way deliberately to hurt you, to persecute you, to pursue for evil intention. Now, the following verse is very interesting because Jesus doesn't leave it there. He follows it with verse 45. He says, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. So, first of all, Jesus says, look, you've heard that it was said, such and such. But I say, love your enemies. Before, you know, it was tooth for tooth, eye for eye. They do you wrong, you do them wrong, to be balanced. It's like we have to balance the equation. But Jesus says, now look, I'm telling you this. You need to love those and do good despite their wrong. And now he clarifies it here in the next verse. That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. Now I want to, before we come back to loving your enemies, I want to look at this concept of being children of your Father. What did Jesus refer to here? Let's go to John 8 verse 39 and look at this idea of what it means to be a child of the Father which is in heaven. Jesus here is talking to the leaders, the Pharisees here, and it's a discussion about origins and lineage and seed and who comes from who and where their ancestry comes from. They answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Now this is the answer to Jesus. The Pharisees saying, we be Abraham's seed. Abraham is our father. Jesus said unto them, if ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. Jesus outlines a principle here that lineage has nothing to do with Christianity. That just because I'm a legal child of Abraham, I can trace my heritage back to Abraham, has nothing to do with my standing before God, whether I'm seen to be right or not. He says, if you were Abraham's seed, what qualifies someone to be the child of Abraham? Their lineage, their descent, their surname. What is it? Their works. Their life determines whether someone is considered by Christ here to be a child of Abraham or not. And we read in the next verse, verse 40, "But now you seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham." Were the Jews qualified to be called the children of Abraham according to Christ here? Were they? No. In verse 40, Jesus disqualifies them as the children of Abraham, as the rightful heirs to receive the promises and the covenants of Abraham. So let's go back to our verse. Jesus says, this is your enemies, and you are to do this. This is how you're to treat them. Even though they might be doing these things to you, what an enemy would do. Hate you, persecute you, go out of their way to bring evil about to you. Now, he says you need to love these people in order that ye may be the children of your Father. Today, what does Jesus say qualifies us to be the real children of Abraham, the spiritual children of Abraham? What qualifies us? He says, love your enemies, and this is what's an enemy, and this is how you're to treat them, despite what they're doing, for the purpose that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. This reveals that you are the children. Your life, your actions, the way you treat others, even under persecution, determines whether you are the children of your Father in heaven. To love your enemies. Now let's pause here because I want to go back to God's plan for man. Now this is after sin. God originally had a plan for man's destination before his sin. But after sin, we find throughout the Bible, we find that God has a plan for man now to bring him back. We find the first one in Romans chapter 8 and verse 29. For whom he did foreknow, he did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be firstborn among many brethren. What is God's intention for you and I today? What is God's plan? That we might be conformed to the image of who? The image of his Son. How was man created in the beginning? In whose image was man created? Remember in Genesis there it says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And what happened after the fall? Was man still representing the image that God created him to be? Definitely not. But God has a plan to restore man, that once again he may stand in the image that he was created to be. Let's look at another verse, Colossians 3, 9 and 10. It says, lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after what? After the image of him that created him. God's intention for fallen man is to restore him back to the image that he was created to be. And Romans 12:2 it says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We're shown here through the Scriptures that God has an intention to restore man. God does not only intend to forgive man, but to restore him back to an image that he once was created to be. And that is the image of Jesus Christ. Now let's have a look in more detail. Who is my enemy? And what constitutes an enemy? From the verse we looked at, we'll break down the verse before we go further, but it says here that our enemy, the ones we are to love, the one that Jesus defines as an enemy, is those that curse you, those that hate you, the ones which despitefully or backbite or slander or speak against you, and those that go out of their way with an evil intention to do you harm. According to Matthew chapter 5 verse 44, these are our enemies. Anyone that has those actions or lives that in their life would be considered to be an enemy. Now we know that Jesus has said this is how you're to respond to your enemies. But let's have a look a little bit more. If we're to summarize these verses and take the principles here out of them, not just look at the actions, but take the principle behind what makes someone your enemy, we would come to, number one, we could define it this way. One that causes intentional harm or hurt. Somebody that deliberately goes out of their way to bring you pain or suffering. And a person, then, it would be someone that does not love you. Can you have someone that loves you if they go out of their way to bring you pain and suffering? Could it be said that I love you if I went out of my way to speak against you, to put you down, to bring evil against you? Could it be said that I am expressing love if that was my attitude towards you? Could it? How could it be? Right? Is love akin to hate? Is love akin to evil? If I'm expressing evil, going out of my way to hurt you, I'm not loving you by any means. So how I'm understanding is that an enemy would be anyone that intentionally brings harm to you, hurts you. Because if they're not expressing love, what are they expressing? If they're not loving you, what are they doing then? Well, if it's not love, then it must be some other spirit. It must be evil. Let's have a look at this idea a little bit more. I want to go back to the beginning. Who was the first enemy of mankind? Who was the first enemy in the human race? Who was it? And let's explore this principle. Those that are not expressing love would by definition be defined as your enemy. Because if they're not loving you, then they must be. Let's have a look. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 12. And the man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I did eat. Let's have a look here, right in the beginning. Adam and Eve are created perfect in the image of God. According to 1 John, what is God? What sums up the character, the essence of what God is? According to 1 John, it's love. Man is made in that image. Adam and Eve are fully expressing that characteristic, who God is, love. But something happens after the fall. When Adam takes that fruit and eats it from his wife, something takes place. A transformation takes place within the heart. And now Adam, not willing that his wife should die alone, now is willing to blame. Now tell me, in this case here, is Adam expressing love or is he Eve's enemy? Was Adam loving Eve at this point? When God says, who did it? And he goes, over there, God, look over there. You find the reason. Was he expressing love? No, of course not. Who was he thinking of? Himself. Who did Adam think of before the fall? Himself? Was he proud, boastful, arrogant, self-conscious, selfish, thinking himself? No. He was created in the likeness of God, and we're told God is love. Therefore, he must have been made like that. And now something takes place after disobedience. A change of heart, a change of mind. And now all he's thinking about is not the preservation of the one he was created to love, but now of his own self. Selfishness, we call it. We're told in Steps to Christ that selfishness took the place of love. And we can see it by his actions now. He is now acting by the principle that he has now taken on board, the principle of selfishness. So what makes someone an enemy? What is it, if we to really go to the heart, what makes somebody an enemy? Let's go back to the verse. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Those that speak... Let me ask you, why does somebody speak bad about somebody else? What's behind that? What is the reason that I would need to talk bad about you? What does that do for me? Why would I do that? What is it doing for me? Sometimes it builds me up. If I'm talking to a third person and I put them down, usually it brings me up. It makes me look better because they are worse. When I'm comparing how bad they are and what they did and did you see and this and this, it's lifting me up, which gratifies who? Or what, I should say. Love or self? Selfishness. It's not love. Paul talks about love in Corinthians chapter 13, and you will not find a definition there that talks about building yourself up at the expense of putting somebody else down. Whether it's your words, whether by action, by look, whatever it is. What makes someone an enemy? Now, if the definition of an enemy is someone that will do you intentional harm or hurt, then I would conclude then that selfishness is the cause of somebody being your enemy. Because selfishness, in Adam's case, was thinking about him. And therefore, in order to preserve him, self-preservation, in order to preserve him, he must put Eve down and accuse Eve before God. And this principle is played out today in churches, even in couples. When it comes to an argument, who's right? Self-preservation must mean I must stay to... And in all it takes. This principle is down. And I want us to see that idea. Or I'll ever ask yourself that question. Why is it? Why is it that the guy... And it means nothing to you. It's no big deal. But what's happening here? Why can two people say the same thing? One hurts you and the other one doesn't. One you hardly even blink an eyebrow. We're not covering in this part, but early on, in the earlier parts, we're looking at love itself. The difference between love and selfishness within the heart of man. As the Bible outlines there, and we look at the condition of the fall, before the fall and after the fall, and we see the differences as it's played out in man's life. When one is motivated by love and one is motivated by selfishness. Think about this for a moment. When man was created, he was created in the image of God. He was created to be loved and to love. Man now sins, and his nature from being love, expressing love, is now changed to only desiring love, wanting love. Is love the source of love? Now man finds himself cut off from God, where his source of love comes from, because man is not able to manufacture love. Man is a recipient of love. So man is cut off from love. Now man still has that craving to be loved. And in order to fulfill that, we get it from wherever we can. And it costs. To take love to fulfill my need. Many times I hurt people to get it. I have expectations, especially when someone says, I love you, then we have expectations about them. And when they don't fulfill those expectations, we get hurt. Think for a moment, the man walking down the street. You have no expectations. You don't know him. You're not familiar with him. You don't know anything about him. And he calls out a profanity at you. It doesn't really mean a lot, unless you're very insecure because of something's happened in your life or your upbringing. But generally, it's not going to mean a big deal. But if your husband or wife says the same thing, because you have a great expectation upon your husband or wife. They vow to love you no matter what you do. And now, when you do something and they express anything but love, it hurts you because you had great expectations. You know, many times when we say, I love you, you know what we say? I need you to fulfill my need of love. So I say I love you because then when you hear that, then you respond and you start showing me love and it fulfills my need. But what happens when the other person says, I don't love you, and you have expectations? Those that we love hurt us the most because by nature, after the fall, we have selfishness in place of love. And selfishness, by nature of itself, draws. It needs. It's got to be fulfilled. And we do it whatever way possible to fulfill. We do it in finding adventure. We do it going crazy all through the world, whether it's drugs or alcohol or relationships or whatever it is. Careers, fame, position, money, whatever it is, there's a craving within man that is not fulfilled in these things, only can be filled by God's love. So I believe it's because of expectations. And because of the principle of a selfish nature craves to be loved. Because we have no love to give, we only take. And in taking, we bring hurt to people. We have to destroy other people to bring love so I'm fulfilled, so I'm lifted up. Let's read here Paul's definition of love. And let's compare this here with the principle of selfishness, which we're told that selfishness took the place of love. Man was created to love because he was receiving love from God. But man cut himself off by his disobedience and severed from God. And now man has the void where love was filling. And so man craves now this love and fills it in everything but the source of love. Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 and 5 says charity here. Now, charity we know, love. Charity today usually means love in action. Gives the idea that there's action following this love, not just love itself, not the word, but action. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own. What does love seek? What does love seek? Not its own. What seeks its own? What principle? What thing seeks its own? Selfishness. Love does not seek its own. Love is not interested in, I need to satisfy me. It's more interested in you. And if we look at what 1 John tells us, that God is love, we see that God, because He is love, is interested in those outside of Himself. Now let's read the next verse. He rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Love has the capacity to bear all things. Believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Let's put this principle of love back into Adam. If the principle of love was in Adam after he'd fallen, and God, and then the Son of God comes and asks him, Adam, what did you do? If this principle had been there, what would have been his response? I'm really at fault. I'm the one. I chose. Don't hold it against her. I'm responsible. And yet we know what happened. Love has the ability to bear all things. Now, if we put love in a human being, what would that mean about that human being? What could that human being do? Endure. What? How much? All things. Because love is in the vessel, the human being, then love endures all things, then the vessel must be able to also endure all things. Or bear all things. Suffer all things. So what allows you to be hurt then? What gives us the capacity to be hurt? Now remember, the hurt we're referring to is when somebody else does you wrong and you get hurt. Why did they have to do that? They should have known better. After all this time, everything I've done, look how they treat me. That's what I'm talking about here. What allows you to be hurt when somebody does you wrong? What is it? Is it love? It's a heart devoid of God's love. Because if love can endure, suffer, bear, does not speak evil against, does not retaliate in spite of being treated this way, then it's not love that enables us to be hurt. What is it that enables us to be hurt? Selfishness. A selfish heart gives us the capacity to be hurt when somebody else wrongs us, or steps on our toe, or says something about us wrongly. A selfish heart will retaliate because by nature selfishness is crying out to take. It's thinking about me, not about you. And when you put me down, I need to fight back. I'm hurt, I'm cut, I'm injured. And as a response to that injury, what usually happens? You either fight back and build barriers, or you just simply curl up and build barriers. But generally you build barriers. Separation between people, between husband and wife, between church people. You can't be around them. You would rather go to another church because you can't stand them, because you've been hurt by them. Or else you fight back. And you respond. What comes out of a selfish heart? How are you going to respond from a selfish heart if you've been hurt? The same way. The response will be the same way. Because selfishness must be lifted up. You need to lift yourself up. So you're going to have to put them down to lift you up. Or you need to tell somebody else how bad and what they've done to you. So you can feel better. So you're not so hurt. So I believe that selfishness gives us the capacity to be hurt when somebody does us wrong. Selfish heart. Now, can you love? I asked this question earlier. Can you love when you have been hurting or are hurt? Can you love somebody else that is hurting you, that is going out of their way to do evil against you? Let's think of this. If you're hurting, now remember the hurt we're talking about, where does it come from? Selfish heart. Not from love, but from selfish heart. And if you are hurting because somebody has stepped on your toe and self is rising up, can you love out of a selfish heart? Can you respond to love your enemies despite what they're doing to you? Is it possible? I believe the answer is no. By nature, Adam gave his response because now it was natural for self to respond in that way. And today I believe if I have a selfish heart, then I have the capacity to be hurt. And if I can be hurt by what you're doing to me, my character, slandering, backbiting, going out of your way to evilly entreat me, if I have the capacity to be hurt because what you're doing to me, then I have no capacity to love, because love does not come from a selfish heart. Hurt builds barriers, separates people, destroys marriages, breaks down friendships. Hurt comes from self that can never love. And this is why we're told that we need a new heart. This is why the gospel is to transform us, because what we are is not the image of God. So many times we're hurt. We live our life with the scars of hurt because of people have done to us. We build up walls around us to protect ourselves because self is being hurt. What if we got rid of self? What if we put love in its place instead? What if we were transformed into the image of Jesus Christ? And this usually takes place in marriage and church relationships, as I mentioned earlier. Because those in the world, if you're working with somebody or you come across somebody at a motel and they're not very nice and they hurt you, what they say, and you don't go back there. You don't have to ever see them again. So that's easy, just put them away. Separate yourself. But in a church environment, it's a bit harder. Because you're both believing about Christ, you're both believing that you're brethren, but yet you're hurt, but you don't want to see them. And you keep coming up, and so it's being difficult. And especially if you're married. What about the person that you vowed your life to, and they're hurting you? Saying some things, or they've said something, and you're carrying it on you. It's much harder to get away. Usually you just build barriers. And love can never be expressed if there's barriers in the way. Just imagine, let's take this concept. Just imagine if God was hurt because of the things people say, because of the things people do to God, for the way they have treated His blessings and His mercies. Imagine how God would respond. For all the things, 6,000 years of humanity in the way they've treated God, cursed God, blasphemed God's name. If God was hurt by every one of those incidents, God would build up such a wall, His love would never penetrate. And we would be outcast forever. But because God by definition is love, He is not hurt when you curse Him, when you blaspheme His name. Yes, He's sad because you're rejecting His grace, but it doesn't offend Him. He's not holding it against you. Because mercy and justice have met together in Jesus Christ on the cross. I want to take a picture here. If we're to be transformed into the image of Jesus Christ, let's have a look. Was Christ hurt by what men did to Him? Luke chapter 23:34. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them. He's on the cross. What all they've done to Him now, He's on the cross, and He says to His Father what? Don't give them eternal life. Don't ever look at them again with mercy. Give them the justice they deserve. And I'm going back home. Christ was not hurt. Christ was not carrying barriers because what men was doing. The Pharisees were trying to chuck Him off the cliff. Were trying to stone Him. The things they said about Him, called Him Beelzebub, the one that has the spirit of Beelzebub, casting out devils by Beelzebub. He wasn't hurt by what they said because He was God in the flesh. He was love. And He says on the cross, after all they've done, He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And they parted His raiment, cast lots. 35. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also. And they derided Him, saying, He saved others. Let Him save Himself, if He had been Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked Him, coming to Him and offering Him vinegar, and saying, If Thou be the King of the Jews, save Thyself. And Jesus in all that says, Father, forgive them. Christ was not holding grudges or hurt against them. He was not built up with all this scars because of all the people have done to him. His heart went in pity, pleading with his Father to not hold it to their account. But he was, instead of responding to evil with evil, he responded with love, compassion and mercy. There's only one way that we as human beings can love our enemies. And it's not if we're being hurt. Because hurt comes from wounding a selfish heart. Luke chapter 9 verse 23, Jesus speaks these words. And he said unto them all, if any man will come after me, let him deny who? Who is he referring to in the himself? What is he talking to? What is man to deny when he says, let him deny himself? What is that himself? Is it my physical body? Or is it that nature that Adam took part of after the fall? The mission of God is to transform man back to what he was created to be, in the image of Jesus Christ. And now he says, if anyone wants to follow after me, to be my disciple, let him put away the old one, the selfishness. Let him deny that. And take up his cross daily. What does that mean? A death. There must be a death to that old life, to that old self. That self that causes you to be hurt when somebody says something nasty to you. That self that causes you to put up barriers, break down families, destroy and break down church relationships. He says that's got to be put away. You've got to be filled again with the love that once filled man. You've got to be reconciled back to God, who is the source of love. But instead we find in the world many people seeking to be filled with love outside of God, the only source of love. And making shipwrecks of their life. Trying to find something that was lost at the fall. And here we are today in church capacity as Christians. And we know the source of love. At so many times we're so devoid of God's love. And we live carrying grudges and hurts and things against other people. The call is, if you want to follow Christ, then that must be put away in a death, in a spiritual death. It says in Galatians 2 and verse 20, Paul says, I am crucified, put to death, no longer alive with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Paul is still alive in his physical body, but his nature has been put to death. The sinful nature, selfishness that enables us to be hurt is put away. But Christ lives in me now. And if Christ, love, how can express love? What people do to us now is not affecting us. We don't build barriers and separate ourselves. We can love despite what they do. This is the only way possible. Now there's a principle in the Bible that starts with love, that allows forgiveness, and ultimately the possibility of peace. John chapter 3 and verse 16, we find it in a few verses. The first verse we read in our Sabbath school lesson this morning. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. So God loves the world. He expresses that love. Ephesians 1:7, in whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins. God's love enabled Him to make it possible through the sacrifice of Christ to be able to bring forgiveness to mankind. Love enables forgiveness, and forgiveness brings something, to wit that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto Himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them. Love enables forgiveness, and when forgiveness is in place, reconciliation can take place. Reconciliation, where there was barriers, where there was scars and hurt. Love enables forgiveness. Forgiveness enables reconciliation. And reconciliation brings something. Romans chapter 5 verse 1. Therefore, being justified or reconciled or made right with God because of His love, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. God's love, because He loved the world, enabled Him through the merits of Jesus Christ, through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, to bring repentance and reconciliation, forgiveness to man. And forgiveness, if accepted, brings about peace and harmony. And the same principle applies in friends, in husbands and wives, church relationship. If there has been hurt, the only way is love must be the foundation by which this is healed and removed. Hurt cannot be done away with by just speaking the words, I forgive you, but I will hold it against you. I'll keep it down. I'm brooding on that. I'll forgive you for church relations, public relationships, but I will not forget how you've hurt me. I will keep it in my heart. It starts with love, God's love. That love that cannot be hurt. But in spite of suffering, of evil, of being persecuted, can love. Is it possible to love people that hurt us? If you're hurting, if self is alive and being crushed, if somebody has violated self, has put you down, and self is alive, then you're hurting. And you hurt, you build barriers. It's impossible to love out of a selfish heart. So I believe the answer to this question, is it possible to love those that are hurting you? I believe it's no. Because if you are hurting, what is hurting? A selfish heart. Pride. Ego. If that's alive, there's no possibility you can love. So are we the children of God? Are we expressing love in despite of what people do to us? What people say to us, how they treat us? Can we love purely without holding barriers? When we first read that statement, love your enemies, I think it's an impossibility. Look at our life history. Try it. Experience it. See if you can. If self is alive, it's impossible. But Jesus said the principle that those that do the works are the children of. Those that do the works of God are the children of God. Are you the sons and daughters of God? Do you sit here today professing that you are the son or daughter of God? Of the God of the universe? Like the children of Abraham, professing by lineage, they had circumcision to prove it. They had the Torah, they had the covenants, they had the lineage. We have today baptism, we have membership, we have our name on the roll. We can prove that we have professed to be the children of God. But do our works prove that? In the judgment, it's your works which you'll be judged by, not your profession. Do we carry a hurt, what someone's done to us? Something we just can't let go, something that sort of keeps us away from people because of what they've done. I'm talking about hurting myself here, not what they might have done because of actions. We can take this further, but how they've just hurt me. I'm carrying this grudge of what they've done, and how could they say that? And why? Are we loving them? This reveals something. It's a picture into the heart of our own heart. And this is a question I must ask myself. And look around all the people that I've ever known, that I've spoke to, that I've engaged in. How do I treat them? Is there people that I won't talk to anymore because of what they've done to me? Then ask yourself, are you dead with Christ? Is self dead in the grave? Or did you take self up after your baptism? Have you allowed self to reign again in your life? Are we the children of God? Let us close with our final hymn. Hymn 324, 324.